they laughed about my job over pulled pork and plastic cups. Same day I got the federal email marked Urgent Signature Anomaly. Names Ellis 57 Risk Auditor by title family embarrassment by consensus. Still remember the wine stain creeping across my shirt, and that old ledger sitting untouched under the table. Ever had the truth knock politely while everyone else was too busy joking? The grill hissed behind me like it was warning someone to stay away. Laughter erupted near the patio table, followed by a clink of cheap plastic cups. I knew that rhythm by heart. Set up punchline, pause for effect. My brother's voice cut through the summer hum. "Ellis still works for that spreadsheet temple, huh?" It landed loud and clean, the kind of jab that only family could throw without guilt. Then came my father's follow-up, smooth as ever. Some men bring honor, others bring excel. The timing was perfect. They'd rehearsed it before, maybe not word for word, but spiritually. I forced a polite chuckle and glanced down at my sleeve wine stain, just dried enough to look like something worse. Janice, sitting beside me, didn't laugh. She took a sip of sweet tea, the kind we only ever made for guests. There was a breeze coming in from the south, too warm to be refreshing. The lawn chairs creaked under shifting weight as Uncle Perry leaned back, eyes glossy from his second beer. "Hey, Ellis," he called across the table. "What is it exactly you do again?" "You still with the government?" I opened my mouth. Before I could speak, Dad leaned in, feigning helpfulness. "Nothing glamorous. He checks commas for a living, keeps the feds from falling into commas and clauses." Laughter again. Softer this time, almost apologetic. But the punch had already landed. I smiled small and practiced, then wiped my hand on a napkin and folded it neatly. I could feel Janice's eyes flicker toward me, then away just as quickly. She wasn't going to step in. I didn't expect her to. A child somewhere squealed at the sight of a bee. Someone's aunt turned the ribs. Somewhere behind me the grill hissed again, and the smell of overcooked meat drifted into my collar. I glanced at the cake. Happy 35th Wyatt, the icing just beginning to sweat in the heat. Wyatt, my younger brother, raised his beer in a small, smug salute. "You should have seen the downtown unit I flipped last month," he said. "Netted 38 before the paint even dried." Dad clapped his shoulder like a war hero had returned. "He's got the touch. Real estate's an art form now." There were only 2 chairs not filled around the long plastic table. One was Mom's gone 3 years. The other was always left for any surprise guest. Dad insisted on it, said it made people hopeful. That's when my phone buzzed. Not a ringtone, just a faint ping muffled under the tablecloth. No one else noticed. I reached down casually and tilted the screen toward my thigh. "Urgent risk control flag. Contract anomaly. Please review tonight." My throat dried. Not from the message, not exactly, but from what it might mean. The system it came from, I hadn't logged in since 2016. Maybe late 16 at best. My clearance was dormant. My credentials locked under layers of red tape, supposedly. Ellis' dad said suddenly, "You still with that compliance? What do you call it again?" Sounds like a skin condition. I looked up, blinking. "Risk division." He nodded clearly, not listening. "Important work. Keeps the nation's grammar in check." Another ripple of laughter. Wyatt joined in, tilting back in his chair as if gravity owed him favors. I wiped my hand again, although it wasn't wet. Just restless. Janice leaned slightly toward me, lowering her voice. "You okay? I'm fine," I said. And I was. Not happy, not angry, Just fine in that buried middle-aged way where nothing reaches the surface unless you want it to. I stood and mumbled something about needing air. No one stopped me. They were busy retelling the joke, now giving it polish. I stepped off the patio, the boards creaking in resignation, and made my way toward the side porch. The screen door groaned as I pushed it open. Afternoon light was fading fast, leaving a golden smear across the lawn. I pulled out my phone again and stared at the message. The sender was internal. No spam, no phishing. It was the real thing. I scrolled up. The subject line had changed. Signature mismatch. Urgent. I read it again. Then once more. My hand tightened slightly. I tapped the screen, but I didn't open the document. Not yet. There were rules about when and how to access archived systems, even for someone who used to be inside. I exhaled slowly. The neighbor's sprinkler ticked rhythmically in the yard next door, a small mechanical sigh that matched my own. Behind me, laughter still drifted through the siding. They had no idea. Maybe they never would. I looked out across the fields where the sunlight clung stubbornly to the tops of the trees. For a moment, I felt suspended between two types of silence, the one that keeps you safe and the one that buries you. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, smoothed the front of my shirt, and watched the last band of gold disappear behind the fence line. "Guess the real party starts now," I murmured. And then I went back inside. The security gate buzzed twice before it gave in. That second buzz always sounded like hesitation. I pushed through and stepped into the corridor. Dust on the carpet muffled my footsteps. Most of the lights were off, leaving long strips of gray shadow across the pale walls. The federal subsection for risk review had once been a humming corner of the agency, now post-reorg. It was more like a forgotten floor in a library that no one had a key for anymore. I liked it better that way. My badge still worked. That surprised me. The HVAC sputtered on with a dry sigh like it was remembering how to breathe. I crossed to my desk, flicked on the monitor, and saw the envelope immediately, manila sealed and placed dead center like it had been delivered with intention. FWD Risk Flag. 2017. Signature attached. I didn't touch it right away. Instead, I sat letting the hum of the office wrap around me. Faint ticking from the ductwork, a slight buzz from the fluorescent bulbs overhead. It felt like 2012 again before they gave us standing desks and training modules about decision fatigue. Finally, I reached out and broke the seal. Inside were 2 sheets. The first was a cover note from IT Dispatch unsigned. The second was a printout of a contract summary dated October 2017, with my name listed under Internal Compliance Oversight and a digital signature block that read E. Guerin, Verified Secure Signatory. It looked real. Too real. I stared at it, heart slowing rather than speeding up. That's how fear sometimes works. It doesn't spike. It settles in like cold water. I was in Ohio that entire week. I still had the receipts from the training summit, not to mention the badge check-ins, archived email, and a blurry photo of me frowning at a vending machine in Columbus. I turned toward the adjacent desk. Landon. The kid startled slightly. Early 20s hair, 2 well-combed shirts always tucked. He looked like someone who still believed in systems. "Can you pull archived log entries for this file?" I handed over the paper. He read it, then glanced up. Sure. You want just timestamp and IP or—" "Everything," I said. "Chain of custody metadata, edit history. No assumptions." He nodded and rolled his chair back to his station. His screen flickered to life in the dark room, illuminating his forehead with a pale glow. I waited, hands folded, trying not to tap. After 5 minutes, he cleared his throat, so he began hesitating. This file, it was uploaded from an internal IP address, but not one registered to this office. Where then Bridgewater? It's residential. Static IP traces back to... He paused again. Garin. Home office. I blinked once. My home? Your father's technically. Same registration name. You still using that network? No. I stood and walked to his desk, scanning the log. There it was. October 2017. 11:23 a.m. Logged in. File created. Digital sign-off. 1 session. Then archived. I was out of state, I murmured. And my work login wasn't supposed to be usable outside the system firewall. He looked up, brows slightly drawn. Then someone cloned it or borrowed it, I said. Without asking. We sat in silence for a moment. The hum of cooling fans filled the space again. Outside, through the narrow slit of window, I could see the top of a parking structure. 1 car. My own. Landon clicked again. His voice dropped. Sir, there's something else. I turned. His screen now showed a different color amber, the system's internal flag for access alerts. This document was accessed again, he said. Last week. I didn't speak. Same file, he continued, but accessed remotely. Location's unverified VPN bounce. But someone went in. Didn't change anything. Just viewed. Print. No record of print, he replied. But they hovered over the signature block for 12 seconds. He didn't need to say more. I was already moving. Back at my desk, I opened the side drawer, a low creak from a track that hadn't been oiled since Obama was in office. Inside was the old ledger. Leather-bound brown corners curled from years of forgotten relevance. I hadn't touched it in ages. The kind of thing you keep not for its use, but for what it reminds you of. I flipped to the index page, then the contracts, then the October tab. There was a gap. Page 217 blank, no entry, just a soft indent where the pen should have pressed. My thumb brushed the leather as I closed it. The cover felt warm, like it had been holding something in. I turned to Landon. Get me IT. I need confirmation on all user authentications tied to my name since 2017, internal and remote. He nodded. Outside, the HVAC hissed again. Somewhere behind the walls, old data was starting to stir. And I knew then, this wasn't just a mistake. This was the beginning of a story I didn't write. The bell above the shop door gave a brittle chime as I stepped inside. Fireleaf books still smelled the same dust-binding glue and something deeper like time pressed between pages. I paused to let my eyes adjust. Outside, July was humming against the sidewalk, but in here the heat settled differently. Thicker, quieter. She stood behind the counter precisely where I remembered her. Marla Keene hadn't aged much. Maybe she'd just always looked like that pinched brow gray cardigan that hung with deliberate neatness, a pencil resting above one ear. She looked up, paused, and offered a nod that was neither cold nor warm, just factual. I wondered when you'd come, she said. I crossed the wooden floor slowly, the boards giving soft protest under my shoes. You're still here? Books don't audit themselves, she replied, then half smiled. And nobody buys ledgers anymore. That gives me plenty of time to file memories. I held out the folded printout. This came through last night. She took it without further comment and unfolded it with the care of someone opening a legal summons. Her eyes flicked across the header, the dates, the block text, the signature. I didn't say anything. She didn't either. Just walked away into the back, the fan on the ceiling clicking faintly in her absence. A minute later, she returned with something wrapped in a faded blue napkin. She set it on the counter like a ceremonial object. "I thought you might come," she said again and slid it toward me. I opened the napkin. My old ledger, brown leather embossed with faint initials E.G. The cover had softened with time, but the weight was the same, like it carried more than paper. "You kept this?" I asked, fingers brushing its corner. "Borrowed. Temporarily," she corrected. "You left it after the 2017 audit. I stored it with my records." I sat on the nearby stool. "I thought I had it in my drawer." She shook her head once. "You had the duplicate. This one's yours." I opened it, flipping to the tab marked Q4, Holdings. The ink had held. My writing. My initials' dates that matched the digital signature. But something was off. The slant. The pressure of the pen. Marla tapped the printout beside it. "That's not your signature." I looked up. "I know my own name," I said, but the words came out soft. "But I also know how someone could fake it, especially someone who—" She cut in gently. "He called me. Your father. Late 2018. My fingers paused on the page. Said you were away. That he needed the original ledger for estate planning. Said legacy mattered." I closed the book. The fan above us ticked again. "He used me," I whispered. "My name. My clearance. My paper." Marla folded her arms and left inkless trails to frame you for it. I stared at her, the weight of that statement pressing harder than the July heat outside. "I always wondered why he never looked me in the eye during holidays," I murmured, like he was playing a role he couldn't quite memorize. She moved behind the counter, pulled another object from beneath the till, another ledger thinner, newer. "Mine," she said. I kept a backup. I wasn't sure I'd need it, but something told me. She didn't finish, just handed it over. "You'll need both," she added. "Not just for proof, for memory." A customer entered just then. The bell chimed again. A college kid in shorts and headphones holding a worn copy of The Old Man and the Sea. He nodded politely, oblivious to the weight sitting between us. Marla rang up the Hemingway, bagged it, and sent him on his way. When the door closed, she turned back to me. "If you're going to dig carefully. I don't know what I'm digging for yet," I said. "You will," she replied. "Ink doesn't lie, but it does fade." I tucked both ledgers under my arm. One familiar, one unfamiliar. Both mine in different ways. I stood at the door hesitating. "You always did keep the good pens?" She almost smiled. "And you always signed too low on the line." Outside, the heat pressed against me like an unwelcome reminder. The sky was hard blue. Cars drifted past in slow rhythm. I looked down at the books I was holding and felt the gravity of something returned too late. and I began to wonder what else had been borrowed without my knowing. "You're in a magazine, Dad." Janice said it gently, not as a boast, but as someone offering a surprise gift she wasn't sure would be welcome. She placed the rolled publication on my kitchen table next to my half-drunk glass of water and a curry-stained spoon from lunch. It wasn't my name on the cover, just a photo, a candid shot evidently taken without my knowledge. I was mid-step outside the Langley building, gray jacket in hand, frown caught mid-crease. The headline read, "Silent Shields, the Quiet Force Behind Federal Safeguards." I didn't say anything at first, just stared at it. A teacup had left a faint ring on the page. Somehow it made the whole thing feel more real. Janice sat across from me. The kitchen clock ticked louder than usual, syncing with the rain tapping against the windows. Outside, Harrisonburg blurred into gentle motion, cars passing, brakes hissing, life ignoring its own significance. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded once. "That photo?" They never told me. "You're not named." "No, that's on purpose." She leaned back, brows furrowing. "Why?" "The job came with conditions." I replied. "Visibility wasn't one of them." She looked down at the magazine again. "But they're quoting you." "A senior integrity reviewer known for flagging 3.4M in legacy misreporting." "That's you." I shrugged. The world likes stories more than credits, and I wasn't supposed to be part of any story. She went quiet. The stovetop still smelled faintly of turmeric and cumin. Leftover curry from last night, my standby comfort food, bubbled low on the reheat setting. Her eyes drifted to the side table where the old ledger rested. The corner of the leather had begun to split, exposing a frayed lining beneath. She reached out, tracing a fingertip along the crack in the spine. "This yours?" I nodded. "The original. From 2017. She lifted it carefully as if touching a piece of history. "Smells like old paper and something sharp." "Ink," I said. "Marla kept it sealed." "Smart woman." Her thumb brushed a worn margin, pausing on a line of handwritten entries. She squinted. "These look like yours. But the signature, this one's not." "No," I agreed quietly. "It's not mine." She didn't ask the next question, not out loud. But her eyes did. I answered anyway. "Yes, he did. Your grandfather signed it in my name." Janice closed the book. Her lips pressed into a tight line. "Why?" "Because it was easy," I said. "Because I wasn't looking. And maybe because he could." The silence stretched, filled only by the dull murmur of the rain. I stood, walked over to the stove, and stirred the curry. Something to do with my hands. "You know, I said I used to think the worst thing was being forgotten. Turns out it's being misremembered." She looked up. "So, you're telling me you flagged something years ago, someone else claimed credit, and now they're dragging your name through the dirt for it?" "No," I said, turning off the burner. "They're not dragging it. They're riding around it." I returned to the table and sat down again. Then I slid the ledger toward her. The crack in its spine made a soft sound like old leather giving one last stretch. "I want you to keep this," I said. Janice blinked. "What?" "It's not about proof. It's about trust. I can't explain everything, not yet. But this book, it matters. Names matter. So does how they're written." She placed both hands on the cover thumbs, meeting in the center. Did he really? I nodded before she finished. She looked away, jaw tightening. I always thought he liked me because I asked questions. He did, I said. But not when the answers got close. Outside, the rain shifted heavier now, less rhythmic. A car honked faintly in the distance. The light in the apartment took on a bluish hue, end-of-day softness. Janice didn't speak for a while. Then she did her voice lower than before. You think they'll come after you? Already started, I said. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. The vibration rattled against the wood. I glanced down. The notification banner read, Federal Inquiry Opened. Testimony required. Deadline 72 hours. I didn't open it. Just turned the phone face down. Janice didn't ask what it said. She just watched my face and exhaled softly. I reached for the magazine and folded it, once careful not to smudge the ring her teacup had left behind. Then I handed it back to her. You can keep that too, I said, in case you ever forget who didn't get named. The hearing room smelled like toner and recycled air. It was the kind of institutional scent that stuck to your clothes for hours after you left. Neutral, clean, sterile to a fault. A woman with a clipboard asked if I'd like water. I declined. I had my ledger. They ushered me into the center seat facing a raised panel of 3. Behind them, a wall of frosted glass diffused late summer sunlight into a soft haze. A clock ticked somewhere, but I couldn't find it. The lead panelist, a man in his 60s with an expression like set concrete, offered a curt nod. Mr. Guerin, thank you for appearing. This session is being recorded. I nodded once. Understood. To his left sat a woman in sharp navy attire, her pen already moving in measured strokes. The third younger wore a fixed expression of polite skepticism, perhaps assigned, perhaps real. An observer from the CIA sat silently in the corner, unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. A legal advisor nameplate turned backward leaned slightly toward the panelists. Begin when ready, the lead said. I opened my folder and removed the first document. Deployment records from October 2017. I slid them forward. This, I began, is the attendance record from the National Compliance Summit in Columbus, Ohio. I was listed as lead presenter for 3 sessions, all held the week of October 9th. These logs were time-stamped and verified by 3 separate badge check-ins, 2 of which include biometric entry at the venue hotel. I waited. The panelist in the center nodded slightly. Go on. Next, I presented a screen capture, an access log summary, highlighting a remote login entry on the same day, same hour, attributed to my secure ID. But the IP address is out of state, the younger panelist asked. Yes, I said. The system tagged it as residential, registered to a private Comcast node in Bridgewater, Virginia. I didn't authorize remote logins that year. The woman in navy raised a brow. Bridgewater, your family's home base? I held her gaze. Yes. I let that sit a moment. Then I placed the next item in front of them, a faxed copy of the contract in question, retrieved from internal archives, an envelope marked by Dispatch Unverified Fax Transmission, 2017, Source Bridgewater, VA. This document contains compression layers inconsistent with government-issued formatting tools, I explained. The digital signature, while externally correct, was placed atop a compressed copy, meaning it was faxed in, not digitally generated. I turned the page. Furthermore, the authorization block reads, E. Garin, Internal Oversight. I looked up. I held that title at the time. But I never authorized this contract. The lead leaned forward. "And your evidence of that?" I reached down and retrieved the old ledger. Its cover made a dry sound as I placed it on the table. "This ledger contains my contemporaneous notes from that quarter. Contracts, reviews, compliance flags. It's in my handwriting. Every single entry has my initials." I opened to October 2017, then to the section marked Legacy Risk Reports. "There is no entry for the contract now under review," I said, because I never saw it. I flipped to page 217. A blank, aged indent sat at the center like a sentence erased too late to forget. I looked each of them in the eye, then read aloud from the printed copy. "Authorization E. Garin." I paused and laid my palm across the ledger's leather cover. I never signed this. I was 700 miles away. Silence settled like snow. The woman in navy shifted slightly. "You're asserting that your credentials were used without your knowledge." "I am," I said. "By someone with access to my digital key, familiarity with my workflows, and a motivation to expedite contract approval during a bottleneck year." "Name?" asked the younger one. "I won't speculate," I said, "but I believe follow-up will confirm transmission from a machine registered to an address associated with my father, Lowell Garin." The lead panelist steepled his fingers. "And your father's connection to the agency former regional contractor. Retired 2016. Would he have motive?" I met his gaze. "He believed in legacy and control." Again the room went quiet. The CIA observer scratched something on a notepad. Then the lead panelist folded his hands. "We'll need testimony from the source origin and the supporting agency that retained these documents," he said. "You may be called again." I nodded. The woman passed the ledger gently back across the table. "Do you have a copy I do?" I said. "But this is the one that matters." The room didn't dismiss me immediately. I gathered my things, slowly printouts, file folder, ledger, each item back in its place like pieces of an exhibit returned to their shelf. As I exited, I caught a reflection of myself in the frosted glass, just a blur mid-step caught between light and shadow. No name beneath, just movement. Outside the air was thicker than when I came in. August pressing close. I didn't check my phone. I didn't look back. The ledger had spoken. And now it wasn't just mine anymore. He said what I asked, though my lungs barely managed the breath. Marla didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the playback console, fingers lightly brushing the edge of the headset jack. He said, "She doesn't need to know. I'm her father." Her voice hovered just above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might break something we couldn't replace. The room around us was dim, intentionally so. Frosted glass muted the overhead lighting, and a single screen occupied the wall behind the tribunal desk. The CIA seal sat quietly on the upper left corner, fading in and out of focus, like a memory refusing to fade completely. Janice sat in the rear row, unmoving. A hand rested in her lap. The other gripped the strap of her leather bag. She had asked no questions on the ride here. She had offered no commentary since we'd arrived. Across from us, Kincaid, lead for the Office of External Ethics, folded his fingers across a narrow tablet. Wire-rimmed glasses caught the reflection of the display behind him. His expression was unreadable, carved from a lifetime of neutrality. "I understand you have supplemental audio," he said, glancing at Marla. She nodded once and pressed play. The sound quality was better than I expected. Faint static at first, then the low murmur of a recorded phone call. Lowell's voice. "He's off-grid for the quarter. Recovery phase. I've got access to his clearance. Legacy matters. We're managing internally." A pause. The contractor's voice replied. "So you're confirming proxy authority?" Another pause. "I'm his father. She doesn't need to know." My breath caught. The she I assumed was Janice. The off-grid was fiction. The voice undeniable. Kincaid tapped a key on the tablet. A secondary file opened an internal memo excerpt highlighted in sterile yellow unverified clearance, access, CM, Garin classified, alias match, pending. The alias string is consistent with pre-2018 clearance constructs, Kincaid explained. But there are discrepancies. He pulled up another screen. A geolocation chart bloomed. This access tag was used repeatedly across 4 clearance portals between late 2017 and mid-2018. But the pings came from residential Bridgewater coordinates. Meanwhile, your badge data places you elsewhere. Ohio, D.C., Fort Belvoir. Marla handed over a document. The metadata from the forged contract PDF matches the MAC address of a Netgear router registered to Lowell Garen's home office. And the editing software I asked already knowing. Kincaid answered flatly. Signif Pro, banned from federal contract formatting since 2015. So not only was the document falsified, it was done with a prohibited tool. Sloppy. Or arrogant. A long silence followed. Then Kincaid leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Garin," he said, his voice steady, but colder now. "Your name was used in 4 Department of Defense side channels, including one with direct audit exemptions." I held his gaze. He continued. "Your father didn't just forge your signature. He impersonated the state." No one moved. Even the quiet hum of the console seemed to falter. My hand rested on the ledger in front of me. The crack in its spine had deepened like an old wound deciding it would stay open after all. I looked at Marla, then Janice. Then I stood. "This wasn't ambition," I said, voice low. "This was legacy theft." Kincaid tapped his pen once against the table, then once more. The screen behind him shifted to a new file tab, Echo R. The title alone said enough. Restricted Echo traces cases involving ethical breaches at the family level. Rare, dangerous, messy. Marla stood beside me. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Janice hadn't moved, but her eyes now met mine. No questions, no confusion, just hurt. I turned back to the panel. "You have everything you need." Kincaid gave a single nod. "For now. But this is not over." He closed his tablet and reached for the ledger. I didn't let go right away. Our hands paused in contact for a second too long. Then I released it. We exited in silence. No one spoke in the hallway. No one needed to. The truth, it seemed, had a weight. But silence had mass. Janice stepped in quietly. No knock, no call. Just the soft brush of her boots against the hallway mat and the muted creak of the front door settling into place. She carried no umbrella, though her coat was damp at the shoulders. On the table, she placed a magazine folded to page 33. My photo again, same gray jacket, same caught-off-guard expression, but this time finally captioned. Ellis Guerin, whistleblower and ethical auditor, testified in 2022 regarding classified clearance abuse. Federal commendation pending. I didn't speak, just stared at it. She sat down, smoothing the page with the flat of her palm. "They should have said more," she whispered. The apartment was wrapped in dusk. October light filtered through the window blinds, dim and indifferent. A pine-scented cleaner still lingered from my half-hearted attempt at tidying. A pot of leftover stew kept warm on the stovetop, untouched. Janice glanced toward the fridge. The city council notice was still pinned there, tacked between a grocery list and a fading takeout menu. A line of text in bold black, Lowell Garin. Position revoked, advisory status terminated. She said nothing, but I saw the shift in her shoulders. A slow release. The letting go of something she'd held too long. I stood and crossed to the corner shelf. From behind the weather radio and an old coin jar, I pulled out a cedar box. Its lid creaked when I opened it. Familiar, aged wood, protesting just enough to remind me it hadn't forgotten. Inside one letter. I handed it to her. "Your grandmother wrote this before she passed. Said I'd know when it was time to read it again." Janice unfolded the paper carefully. Her eyes moved slowly, lips parting slightly with each line. "She wrote in ink," Janice murmured. "Real ink." I nodded. "She never trusted printers." She read aloud softly. "If one day your name is dirtied, remember what soil does it grows something back." The room held its breath. I took the ledger from the side table, the same one that had been present through every accusation, every defense. Its spine was still cracked, but the corners had been mended with new leather. My initials, once dulled by time, now pressed fresh in silver. Quietly, I began to wrap it. Not to store it away, to honor it. I tied the thin ribbon. Janice watched. "New cover?" she asked. I nodded. Same pages inside. Just ready to be read without crumbling. She reached out and rested her palm over mine. "You're not who he said you were." "I never was," I replied. We sat like that, the stew warming slowly behind us, the storm outside finally spent. Then my phone buzzed. Marla's name on the screen. One line, "You're listed as guest of honor. CIA director will address you directly. Tomorrow." I didn't reply. I turned the phone face down and met my daughter's eyes. She didn't smile, but she stayed. And that, in that moment, was more than enough. The hall was hushed. Director Trenton stood beneath the soft sweep of blue light, hands loosely folded at the podium. The seal of the agency loomed behind him, not dominating, just present, as it had always been. Some serve in silence, he said, voice even grounded. Others serve by being heard. Finally, no one stirred. I sat in the second row, center left. On the table before me lay a blank name tag, white laminated, edged in navy. No preprint, just a fine-tipped marker resting beside it. They had left it for me to fill in. Across the room, I saw Marla. Calm, her hair pulled back as it always had been during audits. No smile, but her chin lifted once when our eyes met. Behind her, Janice sat alone. I couldn't see her face, but I knew her stillness. Trenton continued. In 2017, a clearance ID was used improperly. A contract slid through without the right eyes. In 2018, no alarms were raised. In 2019, someone tried to ask questions. Quietly. He paused. But integrity isn't about volume. It's about consistency. A few heads nodded, a shuffle of papers, nothing more. And when the time came, he said that same someone didn't name names for revenge. He simply opened a ledger and let the facts breathe. My throat tightened. I didn't expect a medal, and I didn't get one. Instead, Trenton stepped off the stage and walked toward my row, a white envelope in hand. The agency recognizes Ellis Guerin, he said, for distinguished service in ethical oversight. Applause rose, not roaring, but certain. I stood slowly. My legs felt steadier than I expected. He handed me the envelope, and I nodded not in triumph, but acknowledgement. There was nothing to say, and everything had been said already. They gestured toward the podium. I walked up the steps, one hand still holding the envelope. A camera clicked somewhere. I ignored it. I reached the lectern, adjusted the mic, looked across a sea of suits all waiting. Then I reached into my jacket. The ledger came out smooth-worn, restored initials, silver and proud. I opened it to a clean page, flipped the marker from the name tag between my fingers, and wrote in neat block letters. Today, they used my name. Properly. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Another pause. A breath shared across 400 lungs. Then from the back of the room I heard footsteps. Soft. Purposeful. Janice. She came down the center aisle, not rushing, not hesitant. Just walking as if she'd always meant to. When she reached the front table, she picked up the blank tag I had left behind. Looked at it. Then picked up the marker. One word, written clean. Dad. She placed it back on the table. No glance at me. No need. Then she turned and returned to her seat. The applause came again. Not louder, just settled. I walked down from the stage, passing the line of panelists, hands folded, heads tilted in acknowledgement. No one stopped me. Back at my seat, I placed the ledger down once more and left the envelope unopened. It didn't matter. Outside, the November light was soft against the polished glass. They had said my name, but she had written it. The name tag still sits on my desk. Dad written in Janice's hand. Ink dry corners curled just slightly. Beside it, the ledger with the fresh leather cover waits not for proof, but for peace. I used to believe legacy was something we inherited. Now I know it's something we repair. Sometimes bridges collapse so we can learn which ones are worth rebuilding. If you've ever faced a silence too long held, trust me, being heard isn't as loud as it sounds, but it lasts longer. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? I'd love to read your story below. And if this one touched you, feel free to stay.